Okay, so I want to welcome you to this workshop. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction about myself and about what this workshop is about and the intention of the workshop, and then we'll dive in. And yeah, so as people are joining, just go ahead and come in. If you have any questions, save them for the end if you wouldn't mind. And what else do I want to say? All right, well, we'll get to it. So my name, I guess if you probably know that if you're here, but my name is Linda Downey. Let me give you a little bit about my background and about, then we'll go into this workshop. So my background is that I have been a health and wellness professional for 40 years, actually, which is sometimes mind-blowing to say, but I've been in the wellness space in a lot of different capacities. And what happened in my life was multiple autoimmune conditions. The first one when I was in my early 20s, and continued to get another diagnosis and another diagnosis. I had 4. And I went back to school. At that time, I had my master's in exercise physiology. So I was very much into the body and physiology and all of that. But I was really sick all the time. I had a lot of health issues. I really struggled. And I didn't have success in relationships. I've had 2 failed marriages, and I had my children, and my daughter passed away 4 years ago from really catastrophic medical conditions that she was born with that we didn't know about. So there's been a lot of trauma and stress in my life. And when I was in my early 40s, I went back to school to shift from the exercise and that part of wellness into more chronic health issues because I had them, and more into, I started working with women specifically around chronic fatigue, gut issues, autoimmune, especially thyroid, because that's a very common one. I don't know if you know, but 80 million people in our country have autoimmune conditions, and thyroid, whether it's Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, tends to be a very common one, especially among women. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that women, 3 out of 4 people with autoimmune conditions will be women, will be a woman. So what is it about women and the way our bodies are that has that happen? And that was really what was driving me and my daughter's own health issues. Like, how can I learn better how to take care of her? So in the course of shifting my trajectory, I started to learn about how my own past and my own trauma. I grew up in an alcoholic household. My mother died when I was 4. My father remarried, and it was a pretty volatile household with my stepmother. So when I started to learn more and went back to school in my early 40s, I started to connect the dots and continued to do that. So I shifted really to working with women around trauma and stress. And then how that all connects to health is really my background. Okay, so that's who I am. Hi, Lori. And this workshop, now, if you're new in my world, if you're new in my tribe, whatever, wherever you found me and found a link to come to this workshop, I do a free workshop every month on something in some capacity of the work that I do. And this one, that's not usually 3 parts. Usually it's just 1, but this one is, I broke into 3 parts because I want to really give some time and attention to each part of it. My intention for you for this workshop is that you walk away with some significant understanding about how to connect the dots in your life. And we'll be doing some exercises together. That's why this isn't just a video that I post. I want to have people that I can talk to you and respond to, and you can ask me questions. So we'll be doing some things together. And I also want to give you some tools that by the end of the 3 days, you can have at your disposal and see, how they work for you in your life. And I'll share some resources with you as well. in my journey in doing this work, I've gone back to school a couple more times. It seems like that's my lot in life, but makes me happy. And I've gotten trained in spiritual work, and I'm going to define what that means and the perspective that I look from. So a lot of what I do has a spiritual component to it. And I want to piece all of that together. So we'll be doing trauma tonight, like really understanding that. We'll be doing the health component tomorrow, and we'll be doing the spiritual component on Friday, but I'll, introduce it all together tonight. So does anybody have any questions on that? Are you where you thought you would be? Are you like, wait, this isn't what I thought I signed up for? Or is this making sense and you're where you thought you would be tonight? Anybody? And if you do say something, you're just going to have to unmute yourself and then mute yourself again. And in case you're not familiar with Zoom, down at the bottom, wherever you're looking at, there's a menu bar. There's, I think, reactions. Let me look. Yeah, there's a reactions button. You can click and you could raise your hand if you have a question, but I'll give time for questions at the end. Okay. So again, as I said, my intention is that you get some really useful information. We do some work together. You leave with some tools. I will also give you an opportunity, if you want to do more work with me, an opportunity to enroll in that work with, a significant discount for being on this workshop. So it's not forever, but I'm just starting with a new group next week. And if you wanted to get in on that, I'll make that available to you as well. And I'll share that with you by the end. So first, people are still hopping on, which is wonderful. So first, let's just talk about trauma. And I'm going to define it for you. A lot of the coursework that I've done has been with different people in that area, different experts. So if you've never heard of Dr. Gabor Mate, have any of you can just raise your hand. Have any of you heard of him, Dr. Gabor Mate? Okay. He is a Canadian physician. He's retired now, but he has, I think, at least 4 books out. He does a lot of work on trauma, addiction, palliative care, but he did 20 plus years in addiction and how trauma is linked to people with addictions, narcissistic behavior, things like that. So he's done a lot of work, and I've taken several courses with him. Dr. James Gordon is also somebody that I'm going to reference in this workshop. Dr. Alex Lloyd. So I am a Healing Codes practitioner, a Healing Codes certified coach. I'll teach you that probably on the 3rd day. Maybe we'll touch a little bit into it tomorrow. So those are some of the resources and the people. If you've heard of them, or if you want to check into them later, you'll get the replay here, so you can always listen again. Make sure you have something to write down, some notes, especially when we do an exercise in a little bit. Okay, so you just have a notebook or something like that. All right, so Dr. Gabor Mate in particular, since he is such a renowned expert on trauma, I want to give you his definition, but pretty much anybody who's in that space will recognize this as the perspective that they look at. So trauma is not what happened to you. It's not terrible abuse. It's not, an event like whether you lived through a terrible, like if there was a hurricane in your town and there was devastation, or if you had physical abuse as a child or addiction in your household. That's not what trauma is. Trauma is what happens to you inside of you as a result of those events. That's the trauma. So it's a wounding that happens inside of you, in our nervous system, in the way we think about ourselves and the way we see ourselves and the world. That's the trauma. It's a wounding. So when you think about a wound, right, a physical wound, if you were riding your bike when you were 10 years old and you fall off your bike and you scrape your knee and bang up your knee, that's a wound. And it hurts when you touch it, right? So there's 2 aspects that I want you to think of. It hurts when you touch it. So it stays raw. If a wound heals completely, so you don't have any more issue in it, then it's healed. It doesn't hurt anymore when you touch it. But if it hasn't healed, it hurts. That's true in your physical body. It's also true in your emotional body. It's also true in your spiritual body. So we have a lot of components of us, right? We're not just a physical being, we're a mental being. We have thoughts, and our mental thoughts, we have our emotional body, we have our spiritual body. So trauma or wounding will happen inside of us in the way that we think about ourselves. There's an impact to our spirit, which is why that's included in this workshop. And the other component, besides it being that it hurts, it also can scar over, which is different than healing. If something heals completely, it's healed and it's no longer an issue, right? If something scars over, think about any scar you might have. Like I had a C-section when I delivered my daughter. That scar is numb, right? The nerve endings never really come back when you have a scar. When I was in my 20s, I closed my finger in the car door and I have a little scar right there. And when I touch right on the scar, it's kind of numb. It just feels weird. It doesn't feel the same as the rest of my finger. So a scar, different than healed, a scar is numb. A scar has different quality to it than the rest of your skin. It doesn't grow in the same way. It's not flexible like the other tissue of your body and your skin. It's more rigid. So it stops growing. It doesn't feel, it's more rigid. Okay. That's the same as a scar in your spirit. We stop when we have a trauma and a wound, we stop growing in that place in our spirit. We stop growing emotionally in that place. I'm not saying all over, but in that place where we got wounded, and we become more rigid and inflexible in how we deal with the world. So those are the two components that I want you to keep in mind as we go through this conversation around trauma tonight. Does anybody have any questions on that? Does it make sense? Is it something new that you never heard in that perspective before? No? I could talk all night and I'll just like, blah, 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 but it makes sense. Thank you. I just don't want to be the only one dominating the conversation. If you have something to say, I want to make sure I give you that opportunity. So I want to point it out because a lot of times people use the term trauma kind of cavalier, like, oh, I saw this movie last night, it traumatized me. Well, it didn't traumatize you if there was no wounding that occurred. If you were able to watch the movie, get up and leave the theater, and you don't have a raw spot that's upset, and you don't now see yourself differently, you weren't traumatized. It was maybe scary, it was painful. You might have experiences in your life that are painful, but they didn't create a trauma. So I just want to clarify that too, what I'm speaking about when I say trauma and what really the true perspective is. Okay, so all right, so yeah, let me just make sure I said all of that. I have my notes here. The biggest fallout from trauma, and this is what I'll link to as we go on, the biggest fallout from the trauma is that you lose connection to certain parts of yourself because of that wounding. So here's the thing, when we're born, when you are a brand new baby, so your soul gets incarnated into your body and now you show up on earth, you're just a being. You're a being and there's no wounding. There's no traumatic event that made you change how you see the world. What happens is the world starts to happen, which creates how we see the world. So how you see the world, how I see the world, how I see myself, how you see yourself is all a result of what were the things that happened. Sometimes they happen really, really early. But the biggest fallout is that we lose some connection to ourself, to our spirituality, because when we show up, we have that completely intact. We have our spiritual self. And let me share with you my perspective on spirituality. It's not about religion. It's not about rules that somebody tells you to follow. That's religion, right? So this religion has their set of rules and this religion has their set of rules. You and I could make up a religion tonight and start to say, this is our religion, and it would have those rules. So religion is a lot about what other people say and what the rules are that you decide work for you and you follow them. Spirituality is inside you. No one tells you. It's your connection to God. And it is your home base that we all have. We all have that. And by the way, you don't lose it because you've had trauma. It gets covered up, it gets blocked, but you don't ever lose it. You are inherently a spiritual being, and the spirituality is there. So here are some qualities that come with spirituality. Peace, having peace inside of you, just a peacefulness. That's spiritual. What else is spiritual? Having a wisdom, like a wisdom and a guidance to know what's right for you. That's your inner guidance system, your GPS that God gave us. We lose access to that GPS very often when we've been in trauma, when we've had trauma. And it could be, I'm going to give some examples and I'm going to ask you to look in your life when we do the exercise later, but it could be really big things like capital T trauma, sexual abuse, horrible things. It also could be pretty regular life experiences. But the way a person interprets them and sees them and then holds it, if they hold it as a wound, it's trauma. So it could be in first grade, you walk to the lunch table with your tray and everybody sort of moved so there was no space for you. And you saw it and you said to yourself, no one likes me. That's trauma, because in that moment you experienced something that was painful and you decided, no one likes me. It changed the way you see yourself and the way you see the world. So that wasn't any major abuse. That's the kind of thing that happens a lot to people. Now, it also could happen and you don't decide no one likes you. You go, ugh. Well, you could go, oh, there's no room here. Let me go over there and not think anything of it. Or you could go, oh, who cares? I don't even like them anyway. Let me go sit with these people. They're nicer, and not make it be about you. So do you see how the same exact situation can land very differently depending on the person, depending on what they already bring to that scenario? So by 6 years old, there's been a lot of other experiences that have shaped that. So that's the trauma. It could have a capital T or it could not. And either way, the wounding is there in your physical body and in your spirit. And either way, your spirituality is affected, but it's not gone. It's not gone. And a lot of the work that I do with my clients is uncovering, healing from the trauma rather than letting it be a scar or a wound, so that we can find the spirituality again. That's the work I had to do in my life. I think I told you, if you're late coming on, or not late, but if you weren't on right at the beginning, I've had 4 autoimmune diagnoses starting in my early 20s. So I was very interested in, why is my immune system struggling so, especially when I'm a wellness professional. Like, I was the sickest wellness professional you could find. So why am I doing all the things that I'm told are the ways to live in order to be well, and yet I'm not? That's what got me very interested, was the trauma. Okay, so what happens is, as I said, you get disconnected from yourself, from your soul. You also start to disconnect from other people because trust is a part of this, trusting yourself to be with other people and trusting other people. That's what is going to be affected when you have that trauma, and it changes the way you think about the world and the way you see yourself in the world. So if you're a person who has thoughts like, everybody's out to get me, you can't trust anybody, even your friends, people will stab you in the back. You know, if you are always having those kinds of things, that got created somewhere. It might be what your parents said, so you learned it. It might also be something happened and you decided it for yourself. It might be a combination of the two, because if your parents were already saying that and then something happened, you went, oh, see, they're right. That is what I've been hearing my whole life. And so your experience of your life and of the world will be very different than someone who says, this is an abundant universe. God is always taking care of me. Things will always work out. It's a very different conversation, and it comes from what you've chosen to believe and create. Make sense? Any questions on that? Thanks, Teresa. I know you're muted, but I can read your lips. That's great. Okay. So what I want you to also think about is that there is wisdom in trauma. So inherently, when we're born into these little beings and we have this spirituality, we also have an inherent system to take care of ourselves. So trauma, the way that you remember, it's the wounding and what you decide about yourself and your life. I'm going to keep coming back to that. So there's wisdom in that, because if you are growing up in a situation where the grownups are always fighting, there's anger issues, maybe there's a lot of stress around money, maybe there's alcoholism. If you're growing up in a situation like that, it's wise to learn, I need to be quiet, and to stop yourself from expressing your upset. It keeps you safe, right? So there's a way of coping during the time that worked. It keeps you safe. But by, let me keep my mouth shut because there's already too much anger here, and I'm not going to say what I need, or I'm not going to be angry. You know, I'm in second grade. I'm not going to be angry because that just makes it my father even worse, let's just say. That's where you disconnect to self. That's where you start to shut off what there is to say. So think about it. When a child is developing and they get to be 11 months old, 13 months old, what's the very first word that children say, typically? It would be not, we work really hard for it to be mama, dada, but it is, Teresa said mama, dada, but what it really usually is no, 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 right? That's the child. The very first thing that nature teaches as a way of creating boundaries and safety and expressing yourself is no. Come sit over here. No. It's time to eat. No. You have to go to bed. No. There's poop everywhere. Did you poop in your pants? No. Right? It's the first thing the child learns, and it's a way of setting boundaries as protection. But what happens is, it's not convenient for the grownups. And this is just this isn't even about like real abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. This is just about regular living, right? It's not convenient for the parents if the child is saying no. So what do? We say, don't you say that. Don't you say no to mommy. If you're going to say no, you have to go sit over there in a timeout until you learn how to behave. We call it the terrible twos. Hi, ladies coming on. Kate, Catherine, and Catherine just came on. Kate, Catherine, and Catherine. So we call it the terrible twos, right? That's the time when children, that's one of their first words, and they're really expressing themselves. But it's not terrible twos. It's nature's way of teaching a child to have appropriate boundaries. But when they can't have appropriate boundaries, when the grown-ups say no, don't you say no to me, or doctors in mom's world are saying the best way to make the child go to sleep is to let them cry it out. Go ahead, put the baby and let them cry it out. And the baby's crying to be held. The most important innate thing that we have is the need, the expectation on a spiritual level. We're made for love. We're made for love. So our lungs are made for oxygen, right? That's what their inherent quality is. Lungs are made for oxygen. Human beings are made for love and safety. We come from a frequency of love. We come from God, source frequency. That is love. That's the frequency that our soul inherently holds when we come into this body. Love and safety, the two most important things. The third is significance, feeling important. But love and safety is all that a child needs. And then there's self-help books telling moms, let the child cry it out, let them learn how to self-soothe. There's our own, tools or lack of tools. I think every human being does the best they can with the tools they've been given in any given circumstance. And I've posted stuff like that on social media and definitely had a backlash from it because people are like, you didn't know my parents or whatever. Given the tools that anyone has at their disposal, people do the best they can with what they think is the right thing. Nobody inherently says, let me be abusive. But that's the tools that they have. So kind of got off track there. Let me just pull my thoughts back in. So a child is looking for love and safety. And the moment we have an experience that's other than that, here's the other part of wisdom around trauma. So I was saying that there's wisdom in trauma because it keeps you safe. The other part of that is, what is it safer if you're 4 years old and your parent is saying, go sit in the corner, get out of my sight. I can't believe you did that. Or stop your crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Which is it safer to believe, that this person that you have bonded to and love as your caregiver and as your parent, as a primal relationship, is hurtful to you? Or is it safer to believe there must be something wrong with me? They wouldn't yell at me if I wasn't doing something wrong. There must be something wrong with me. That's going to be the safer decision, right? Because if there's something wrong with me, it means, okay, that big grown-up that I'm counting on to take care of me, there's not something wrong with them. There must be something wrong with me. I must be unlovable. I must be not worthy of receiving the nurturing that I'm craving. I must not be worthy of it. Meanwhile, mom just thinks she's teaching you, how to wait your turn. She's teaching you how to self-soothe. She's busy with 3 other kids. Parents are fighting and they don't have it in them that night to hold you. Whatever it is. But the inherent nature of children is to need love and security. And when that doesn't happen, we create a belief about ourselves. So we're going to go into that in just a minute. But I just want to, when I say go into that, we're going to do an exercise around that so that we have some time to do the exercise and to also answer questions about it afterwards. But what I want you to think about is, again, just like the example when I gave of you're in first grade and you're carrying your tray to the lunch table and everybody moves so that you can't sit down. You can interpret it a couple of different ways. One is nobody likes me. One is, okay, fine, I'll go somewhere else. There must be another spot somewhere else. One is, I don't like them. Fine, I don't like them. They're all jerks. Let me go find my people. In any given situation, the way that you're held and nurtured through it is going to greatly determine how you feel about yourself, especially when you're in those younger years. So up until the age of 7 or 8, we don't have the ability in our brain to make logical decisions about what's happening. When I say logical, like to see the whole picture, other than we see it in terms of ourselves. That's how children's brains are wired. They're also wired up until the age of 12. So you and I, up until the age of 12, were wired to see things in relationship to ourselves, but also to really go into our inner world, like that our inner world was the most important. After the age of 12, when kids hit middle school, they start to look at the outer world more important, like connecting with their peers. Who am I out in the world? You're not doing that when you're in first grade, second grade, third grade. You're very much into your own inner world and love and connection with your primary caregivers, if you have that. So I saw that Amy left a comment. Let me just see. Child essentially thinks my existence depends on them, so I have to maintain them as okay and good. So there must be something wrong with me instead. Exactly. It's the safe interpretation to make. Because if there's something wrong with me, that would explain why they are treating me this way. If there's something wrong with their ability to treat me, now I'm really in trouble, right? Because now it doesn't matter what I do, they don't have the tools to treat me, which is not like a whole thread that a kid would have, but that would be the feeling, right? So we talked about one of the biggest consequences of trauma is the disconnection to self, the loss of belief in yourself, the loss of self-love. We stop loving ourselves because if I'm not lovable, why would I love myself? The loss of connection, the loss of that paying attention to your internal compass, right? Your God-given GPS, your intuition. So that shows up in your later years when you're a young adult and an adult, you're in a relationship and there's tons of red flags, but you shove it down. No, I'm sure it's just me. Or if I can just be better, it will be better. It's a red flag. It's your intuition saying, this is not okay. This is not right. But you're so used to, when you started saying no, people said, don't you say no to me, that you don't pay attention to the red flags. And when there's been wounding, it's like at a subconscious level, you're a target for people who manipulate. You're a target for people who are predators on other people, like narcissists, which is just their own wounding, by the way, just their own wounding. And the way they learned to attach and to be in relationships was wounded. When that happens at certain times of development, narcissism gets developed. It's their own wounding. But it's like you're like on this subconscious level, like a radar for each other. So that's why it's so serious and has a lot of consequences, because it sets us up for a life of more wounding, a life of, feeling disconnected, a life of having to cope. Maybe this is resonating with you. Maybe you're on this workshop because that's been the case. I don't know. And you don't need to say that out loud unless you wanted to. But in all of that losing connection to self, the biggest thing is the boundaries and the saying no, because that's where it starts, right? That's the first thing that we learn. We just talked about that. No. Before you can say any other words, no, you're learning boundaries, appropriate boundaries. So that's the first place to look. And I'm going to give you a couple of markers that I want you to, I'm going to say one and pause and let you write it down. And I want you to look and see if it applies to you, but these are markers that your boundaries and your ability to say no have been skewed because of trauma. Okay, so the first one is you have an automatic, almost a compulsive, automatic regard for the needs of other people at the expense of your own needs. So write that down. An automatic, compulsive regard for the needs of others at the expense of yourself. So you ignore your own needs. Is that ever happening to you? That's the first marker. The second marker is, do you repress healthy anger? Catherine, I don't know, you might want to mute if you know how to do that, because your mic is on. Thanks. Perfect. So do you repress healthy anger? That would be someone who's always so nice, so nice. When you repress your anger, you're also repressing your immune system, which is why we're going to get into health and autoimmune and any malignancy, not just autoimmune, not chronic conditions like autoimmune, and malignancies like cancer. When you repress your anger, you repress your immune system. So here's, we are multidimensional, multi-layered beings. In the Western culture, we've separated physical body over here, emotions over here, spirit over here. You go to your priest for your spirit. You go to a psychologist if you're upset emotionally or in your thinking, and you go to a doctor over here. They're not separate. In fact, your physical body, your physical health is the representation of your mental and emotional state over time. If you're thinking and feeling things over and over and over, or repressing them, your physical body is going to show that. In Chinese medicine, they recognize that. And that's been around for 3,000 years with great results, people who do Chinese medicine. But every organ is related to specific emotions. Anger is related to the liver. The job of the liver is to get toxins out of the body. Anger is toxic. If you're repressing it, you're not letting the anger out of the body. You're also repressing your liver function. Toxins are staying in the body. That's going to impact the other tissues of your body. It's going to impact your immune system. And now here, and I'm sure I'll say this again tomorrow, but anger is a boundary, right? 2-year-old says, no, boundary, no, don't take that from me, or I don't want to do that. No, boundary. What's your immune system? It's a boundary between invaders from the outside, bacteria, viruses, chemicals, preservatives, rogue cancer cells. Your immune system is the barrier between those things and the healthy functioning of the rest of your body. So your immune system is the physical representation. The anger is the emotional representation of having healthy boundaries or not. Again, healthy anger. So feeling anger and allowing yourself to express it, knowing it's safe to express it, saying no when somebody's gaslighting you or telling you made something up, or, promised they'd do something and then didn't, and you don't say no, you're not allowed to do that. You do that over and over and over again, autoimmune is going to show up. Autoimmune, by the time you have symptoms, it has been in your emotional and energetic body for years. So my first autoimmune condition was in my early 20s. It was ulcerative colitis, showing up in the gut, right? So the gut is your second brain. Your gut is your intuition, right? What does my gut tell me? When you have butterflies in your stomach because you're nervous about something, right? The nervous system, the vagus nerve lands in the gut, but your gut is your intuition. So not a coincidence that the first health issues often show up for people in their gut health. They're bloated all the time. They can't eat a lot of particular foods. They're either constipated or diarrhea. They don't ever feel good in their belly, like that. That was me. Now, I told you, I grew up in an alcoholic household. My mother died when I was 4. My father remarried. Very volatile situation with my stepmother and my father. And I can remember being in 3rd grade, because I remember it was Mrs. Caparola's class, which was my 3rd grade teacher. And I would start to look at the clock at like 2 o'clock, and I would start to get a stomach ache because I didn't want to go home. I knew school was going to be done in an hour and I was headed home, and I just never knew what was I going to walk into. I just never knew. So I would get the stomach ache. Well, when you start that in 3rd grade, colitis is going to show up by 21. Now at the time, so I'm 58 now, so 21 was, however, do the math, it was a minute ago. I went to a doctor that when that happened, and he was probably in his 60s back then. And he said to me, he diagnosed ulcerative colitis. I had bleeding ulcers. They did the scope, they could see them. He said to me, "You're not going to find this in any medical book, but I'm telling you," and he was, like I said, well into his 60s. He said, "I'm telling you, this is all stress related." That was 30 something years ago, 37 years ago. I didn't pay attention, I just kept living my life. And then by my later 20s, the next autoimmune showed up. But it started in 3rd grade. It actually started before my mother ever died, honestly. But that's more work than what we're going to get into tonight. But that's where the stage is set. By the time you have symptoms, it's been brewing for years, and there's always an emotional and energetic component to it. So that was the repression of healthy anger. Sorry, I told you I'm going to give you 4 markers. The first one was your automatic compulsive regard for the needs of others first. The second one was repression of anger. The third one is compulsion to duty, like your how you see your roles and your responsibilities as a wife, as a mother, like compulsively. This is how I'm supposed to do it. Living up to an identity that you developed and in a compulsive need to do that. And then the last one is looking at the beliefs. If you have beliefs like, I'm responsible for how other people feel. I'm responsible for how other people feel. Or I can't disappoint anyone. So do you have beliefs like that that run your choices and your life every day? Those are the 4 markers I want you to look. Do any of them resonate with you? Okay. Good. So the good news is you got a place to go to work from. Okay. If you can't say no, here's a really, really great thing. If you can't say no, then you have no access to saying yes either. Yes to yourself. If you can't say no, then you have no access to yeses for yourself. Lori, you have all of them. Yeah. So that's where you want to look at, what we're going to do in just a moment is an exercise and see if we can uncover some of that. If you can't say no, if you repress your anger, if you put everybody else's needs first, remember I said autoimmune is 3 out of 4 are women. Don't these traits describe a lot more women that you know than men? So that has a lot to do with culturally, how we're told we're supposed to be as women. how what we see our mothers do. And so we do the learned behavior. There's generational trauma, which we're not even going to get into in this workshop. I do that in the work with my clients, generational and cultural trauma as well, because we get that before we're ever born, but we're not going to go into that tonight. So I'm going to give you a couple of questions, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to answer each one. So we'll just do one at a time. Okay, so the first question is, and then I'm just going to be quiet and I'll pay attention to the time. Where in my life do I have difficulty saying no? Now, listen, I'm not saying that there are times when you want to say yes. There are times when it lights you up to say yes to someone. It makes you happy. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the times when no is there, you feel it, you want to say no, but you don't. So when there's a no there, but you still say yes, where does that show up? So I'm going to give you like 2 minutes. Try to just be as specific as you can. Look throughout all areas of your life. Yeah, Lori, thank you for your comment. We'll get into that a little bit if you want to, after we go through these questions. Okay, I'll give you like another minute, but look, you can look at specific relationships like your personal, family, partnership, children, parents, work relationships. Okay. All right, the second question I want you to ask yourself is, what is the impact on me when I always say no? What is the impact? So I'll break it down for you. One part of that is what happens in my body. What happens in my body when I'm saying yes, but I want to say no? You can maybe think about where you feel it, or just what shows up in your body, and then what shows up in your emotions when you want to be saying no, but you say yes. Okay, great. Yeah, put that, Lori, are you writing it in a notebook? Are you keeping notes? Try to like grab some paper. Okay, good. You are. Okay, good. Because I want you to keep this for yourself after we're done. You'll get the recording. Okay, and then the third part, what is underneath my inability to say no? What's in the background? So if I say no, then blank. Fill in your blank. What's in the background? If I say no, then blank. Okay. Anybody want to share anything about what came up for them with those questions? I mean, I know Lori was sharing along the way, so thank you. But anybody want to unmute themselves and
We're gonna go in order of the questions, like question number one.
yeah, I mean, you can tell me the answer to each one, or you can just summarize it, whatever you want to do, Teresa. Do you want to go in order? So do you want to go in order? Let's do that.
Yeah, where in my life where I have difficulty saying no.
Uh-huh.
And there's when I'm asked by my brother to go to dinner with my uncle, there's times I really don't want to go, but I don't feel like there's times I've gone when I really just wanted to stay home and get other stuff done and not
Okay.
go to dinner.
Okay.
And I would feel guilty. And when someone invites me to go someplace or somewhere, I would feel bad if I would say no. If I could go, I always try to go. Unless I see, like, just this recently, I was invited to my cousin's little guy's first birthday, and I would have loved to have gone. And I feel bad saying no, but I have a wedding that day. So I had no choice. I had to say no. So that was acceptable. But if I had said no because it meant traveling to Maryland by myself, I would have felt bad saying no. I would have tried to figure out how could I get myself there, because I would have enjoyed myself, but it would have created a difficulty for me in my getting there.
So let me just,
sense.
yeah, it totally makes sense. But what I hear in that is you actually would have wanted to go. It just was a logistical thing that would have been a problem, but it wasn't
Right.
like, but you would have your heart would have wanted to go.
Yes.
Okay. So that one is not really what I'm talking about. It's the ones where your heart doesn't want to go. Which
Well, then it would be, I would feel bad about my heart not being in it, if that makes sense, where it's my cousin's firstborn child, and I feel bad that I didn't want to go. And it just worked out that I couldn't go. But if I didn't want to go, I don't know if that makes any sense or
well,
not.
you're saying any time where you don't want to go, you feel badly.
Right. But then there's times where something will come up and I don't want to go, but I feel an obligation that I should go.
Okay, those are the times we're interested in. So because if you're saying yes to something that you want to say no to, which is different than I want to say yes, but I just don't know how I'm going to get myself there. I really wish I could go, but
Yeah,
it's not.
I understand what you're saying there.
That's different, right? But if you're like, I do not want to go to this thing, or I do not want to take care of this, or I don't want to take on the responsibility, then it really is a no. But you say yes, right? So I hope everybody's.
And I get irritable, and I don't do it with a good heart, because if I say yes when I really want to say no, that I really don't want to do it, I find I get short-tempered and impatient while I'm doing it.
Okay, so that's
my mind. It would have been better had I just, no, I can't do it, and ended it that way than trying to do it and not do it with a good heart, like resenting that I'm doing it.
So what I hear is resentment. So when you say yes, even though you want to say no, there's resentment. I don't know, you used another word now, I can't remember what it was about in your body, but think about
Irritable, I'd be
irritable. That was the word. Yeah. Irritable. So I get resentful, I get irritable. And when you're resentful, everybody listen to this through your own examples, how you answered your questions. What do you get? When you're resentful and irritable, how do you feel in your body? There's like a clenching, there's a tightness, there's, it might affect your sleep. If it's a big enough thing and it's out far enough, you might be losing sleep every night, thinking about how I don't want to do this, or how am I going to get out of it, or whatever.
right.
Right? So it can affect sleep. When you're resentful and irritable, how does that affect the relationships in your life? The people that you live with that have nothing to do with the situation, but now you're resentful and irritable, and you're not sleeping well.
Well, not necessarily because I live alone. So it's not like I'm bringing it home and taking it out on my kids or my husband or whatever. It's just, I'll turn around and do something harmful to myself, like overeat or,
Okay. Perfect. That's a
yeah.
perfect example. So for those of you who do have people in your households, what's it like when you're feeling resentful and irritable? What do you bring to the table? And whether you have people in your households or not, Teresa brought up a great thing, which is now you're punishing yourself in order to deal with it, which is what addictions are. An addiction is a disconnection to self, and then we go and cope with that disconnection. So overeating, zoning out on Netflix, having a couple of glasses of wine every night. There's the big addictions that you think of, just like there's trauma with a capital T, but then there's also all the ways that we cope. There's our coping mechanisms, and eating is a big one. Smoking, whatever. So that's the impact on your physical and emotional body. And now I just want to get to, you kind of said it, I feel guilty. So if I say no, then I am what? A bad person? Then I am what?
Selfish.
Selfish. Okay, perfect.
Especially if I have the time. That's where sometimes people, like I get annoyed when people will call and say to me, gee, what are you doing? You doing anything Tuesday? And I'll say no. And then they'll say, well, gee, could you do this? And it's like, just ask me what you want me to do. Like, you took away my ability. Like I already said, I really don't have plans for Tuesday. So now when they ask me something, it's like, how do I say no when I already told you I don't have plans on Tuesday?
Well, so
I really don't want to do.
So hold on, because you think the only way to say no is if you have a valid something else more important.
A lot of times, yes.
So now you put it on, well, hold on. So now you put it on them. It's their fault that I don't get to say no.
Oh, I didn't look at it that way. Yeah. But that's where it's like, just ask me what you want, and then it'll be up to me whether I say no or not. Because that'll be my guilt to say, if I just told them I don't have plans, I'm thinking, well, now they'll be pissed at me if I say no.
There's the rub, Teresa, because that if I just said I don't have plans, now it's not valid for me to say no.
Right.
The only time I can say no is if I must have something already in place that makes it valid, which means my no is not valid. Only something else more important is valid.
I see. I understand what you're saying. I do. I hear that, but then it's like, I think it takes away my ability for me to say, well, I really don't want to do that. Like, and I guess I really.
It only takes away your ability because you give it away. They didn't do anything. They didn't take anything from you. You give your ability away to say no because you've decided that my no is only valid if there's something worthy enough to say no about. If I have an open afternoon, then I'm supposed to be here for anybody else's beck and call, or I'm selfish. The bottom line, it's the belief. That's what I said. What's underneath or in the background is your belief. And your belief is, it sounds like, I'm selfish if I ever just have time for me, or if I ever don't want to do something for you without having something more important. That makes me selfish. That's your belief.
Yeah, I guess that is, yeah. To
It
hear
is.
somebody else say it hits home, but now that you're saying that, yes.
So let me ask you, well, before we go on, does everybody see that? It's always easier to see when it's somebody else's conversation than when it's your own conversation. But does anybody have any questions on that? Let me see what's in the chat. People will be discouraged in me and I won't feel happy or make the people happy. Yeah, so that's your belief, Lori. I won't make people happy. People will be discouraged in me. It's not easy in a 1-hour workshop where we're doing a lot of stuff for you to see your beliefs and your stories, but those are your beliefs and your stories. You made them up at some point, which would be my next question. When did I learn that? When did I learn that the only valid way to say no is when I have something else more important? When did I learn that? Where did I develop this belief? Was that how my mother was? Did I say no one time to somebody when I was 8 years old and they were like, well, that's really selfish of you. You don't have anything else to do. And so you took on, I guess I'm selfish if I say that. Where did that belief come up? So Lori put in the chat, I will disappoint people. Where did you learn that if you say no, you disappoint people, or that you're responsible for other people's disappointment or happiness? Where did you learn that that's your responsibility?
You want the treat?
Amy, you want to mute yourself?
Sorry, thought I had.
No worries. So where did you decide it was your responsibility to make other people happy? Where did you decide that what makes me a good person is if I put other needs first? That all happened somewhere very young in the way that you had to cope or learn to cope with what was going on. If I make it okay for them, then my father won't get angry. If I seem selfless, like I'm not important, then I won't rock the boat. If I can make other people happy, maybe we won't have the strife and the anger in this household. Or whatever comes to mind. Any memory that you can think of where asserting yourself created a problem, contributed to this belief that you have, that is now keeping you hostage. And maybe it doesn't sound like a big thing, but as we learn about our immune system and relationships and your connection to your spiritual self, it's everything. It's all of that. Hans Salye, if you ever took like Psychology 101 in college or whatever, Salye, S-A-L-Y-E, he was the psychologist who defined stress. Like it's his definition of stress. And I don't remember how long ago that was, but it was a while ago, that we use when we learn about the stress response and all of that in psychology. So he says, what is in us must come out. Otherwise, we become hopelessly hemmed in by frustration. That's what happens when we want to say no, and we want to say no, and we want to say no. and we're allowed to say no. So let me ask you this, Teresa. So you guys hang in with this conversation. Teresa, I want you to write me a check for $30,000. Can you do that?
No,
No problem saying no, right?
right,
You don't need a reason. You don't need to say to me, I need 30,000 to pay my mortgage. There's a better reason for me to give my 30,000. You don't need to tell me that. It's just no. It was right there. You felt it. You said no. Right?
it was that split second, depending on who the person is asking me, like that split second of saying, well, how would I be able to do that?
Well,
It's-
okay. But then you said no. You didn't,
No.
you didn't in your head go, no, I'm not sending you 30,000, but then out loud go, well, okay, what do you need it for? And
Right,
if you did do that, like you're really like a no, but like, well, let me see if I can do it, then there must be a threshold. Let me make it be 100,000 or something where you're going to be like, no. And there's no reason for the no other than it's a no.
it's a no.
So that's no different than, the person asked me what I'm doing on Tuesday and I said I didn't have anything to do. So now they ask me, can I help them? If the answer is no, the answer is no, just like the 30,000. If the answer is there, then it's no, then, and if they say, well, why not? I just asked you to say, I can't, right? I can't say yes to that. I can't say yes to that right now. There's nothing that you need to explain or have better than in order to justify your no. The no, and the more you say no, the less resentful you're going to be. So then if you do actively say no and somebody asks you for something, see, that's the resentment that came up, right, Teresa? Like they just took away my ability to say no, like I'm pissed off now. Well, you're pissed
Mhm.
off because you're always regularly saying yes when you
Yeah,
want to say no. So
I've conditioned people. I have people that are close to me that I've conditioned them over the years. Like, it's like, they're shocked if I do say no. Like, what do you mean? That's like against my,
right.
yeah, because I never do, if I can, I never do say no. I'll always
Right.
say,
Which is part of when we're working on our lives, we have to give grace to the people around us because we trained them. We
yes,
trained them.
yes.
So, okay. So as I said before, when you don't ever say a yes, or let me put it this way, until you learn to say no, your yeses don't mean anything. Because you just say yes all the time. There's no value to it. When you learn to say no, then when you show up with a yes, it's valuable and you're starting to show up as your authentic self. And people respect that and hold that. Now you're not going to be a radar for a manipulator.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense.
The other thing is when we always say, how do I want to say this? When we don't ever say no, then there's a place where we're also never saying yes to ourselves. So when we never say no to others, then we're never saying yes to certain parts of ourselves. So that might be self-love. Something is getting sacrificed that you're not saying yes to because you keep saying no. I'm sorry, because you keep saying yes to others and you're not saying no.
No,
Right? So if you're never saying no, then you're not saying yes to your own self-love, maybe time in nature, time to be creative, time for alone time to connect one-on-one with certain people, time to connect with yourself in solitude, time for music, time for art, all of the things that actually develop our soul and the whole right side of our brain. You're never saying yes to that if you're always saying yes to everyone else,
Everybody else.
right?
Yeah,
So
but- yeah,
that's the last question I want to ask you for tonight is, where in your life is there a yes that wants to be said, but you've not left any space for it? Where in your life do you want to say yes, but you've not left any space for it?
in my life.
Actually, one more question. Who would you be if you knew how to say no? What would be different in your body? What would be different in your relationships? What would be different in your experience of yourself? It's just something for you to chew on, jot
Okay,
it down.
okay. No, I'm writing it down. I'm, to think.
Where is there a yes that wants to be, but you haven't given space for it? Maybe it's exercising and self-care. Maybe it's a hobby or a passion that you've never allowed yourself to start. Maybe it's speaking up in a relationship, which would be your self-expression, really sharing. I have a client today who she's been my client for a long time, and she had a lot of, her thing was to always be perfect. She had a lot of self-doubt and a lot of like, I'm not good enough, not good enough. So she's sending me a message today about an issue with her husband. So I just responded, like, we went back and forth like twice. And then she like, how does this sound? And it was so different than she was a year ago. I was actually super proud of her. But it's like in a marriage, the marriage that she wants anyway, is a marriage that allows for full self-expression. This is my life partner. I want to be able to say to them what there is inside of me, not from a place of accusing or making them wrong and making them defensive, but from a place of love. We're in a lifetime partnership. You're the one person in the world that I want to be able to express myself. So maybe that's where your yeses are not showing up in your relationship or relationships. But where in your life is there a yes that wants to be expressed and you're not allowing it? And who would you be if you knew how to say no? Who would you be in all the aspects of your life? That's what you're going to think about.
All right. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome, Teresa. Anybody else have anything to say or ask? Did this open anything up for you?
Well, it opened things up for me.
Okay, good. I can tell you're just taking it all in.
It did for
Okay,
me
guys.
too. It
Okay.
did for me too.
Okay. Okay. I just don't want to like step over. Sometimes people want to say something and they're afraid to, or they don't want to ask a stupid question or whatever. And I want to give you the room to do that. So think about this tonight. If you can make it again tomorrow, great. I hope to see you there. As soon as this downloads and stuff, I'll send an email out with the recording to everybody. There's like 75 people registered for this. So there's a good list of people. Obviously, there's not 75 people on. So I'll be getting that out tonight and you'll have it to keep. And just chew on what we talked about. Tomorrow, we're going to go more into the health aspect of it. I'm going to give you a tool to help you with your nervous system. And then we'll go into the spirituality of it. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And if there's anybody in your life that you think this would make a difference for, it's a free workshop. Have them come. They can still join with the link. Just send it to them, or I can send it out to them if you let me know, and they can get this recording too. Okay?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Have a
Linda.
good night. Yep, I'll
Thank
see you
you.
tomorrow. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.